up where I can see it, my top of my screen. Aaron, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, hi Liz, thanks for the intro. My name is Aaron Carpenter. I'm a director and formerly the CEO of one of the entities within the Transact Payments Group. We're a BIN sponsor offering services in the UK and Europe, and very much looking forward to the chat today and talking about this very, very interesting topic.
Wonderful. Marnie, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marnie Kruppa. I am from Visa, where I'm the head of FinTech. So myself, my team, we partner across the European region to win new FinTech deals on the issuing side and manage those clients. And I also have a team that's focused on our crypto vertical as well. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Zoe, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Newman. I'm the US Managing Director for Capital on Tap. Was having some technical difficulties getting in, so just arrived in the nick of time. Sorry about that. So I've been with Capital on Tap since we started in 2012, and kind of worked in a few different areas around the business, and just in February of this year moved over to Atlanta in the US to head up our US operations.
Excellent. Wonderful. And Adrian, please close us out.
Yeah, hi everyone. Super happy to be part of this panel here. Adrian, I'm a partner at the consultancy Ross Republic. We're based in Amsterdam, Berlin, and Helsinki. Typically work with financial institutions, so large traditional banks, fintechs, and increasingly also companies from outside the financial services sector. And what we do is basically design, invent, and then also scale new digital business models. So also a topic close to my heart today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we're going to start with a question for everybody. I mean, the growth of e-commerce in a lot of countries, including the UK, has been huge. And this has sort of driven that concept of expanding internationally. It's gained a lot of sort of strong momentum with a lot of companies. However, what works in one country sometimes is very difficult to replicate in other regions and other markets. So what are the drivers for your company to look at that international expansion? So Marnie, I'm going to start with you with that question.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll try to frame it a bit more from the FinTech perspective and how Visa thinks about it. So I think for us, when we think about international expansion, for me, like the two questions stand out, right? So one, is there an opportunity for you as a FinTech business? And two, can you capitalize it? Are the conditions right for capitalizing on that opportunity? And when I, as Visa, when you look at sort of the macro opportunity there, and we break it down, here we break it down into consumer and then the new flows, which is sort of B2B commercial type payments and all the value-added services under and across the spectrum. There's huge, ample opportunity in terms of displacing cash, digitizing transactions, and really just growing this market. So to bring it to life a bit more, I think we, in Q2 of this year, Visa stated that there were over 7.9 billion more payment transactions and 16 million less cash transactions. So you can see that shift happening already. Second sort of stat to throw at you, we estimated earlier in the year, we estimated $185 trillion opportunity in the B2B space. So I think the answer to the first question, is there an opportunity? Yes, by sure that large and small financial institutions are capturing that opportunity and innovating and trying to get into this space. And then when it comes to, how you actually capture the opportunity, I think the questions in my mind, if I was a FinTech CEO, is one, are there customers? Is there demand for my product? Is there competition, but not too much? Right? Is there a space for my business to enter? And I think across Europe, obviously it depends on the situation, but you have thriving, viable consumer bases. You have a competitive market that's favorable to businesses growing and expanding. We look at the regulatory conditions, and it's easy enough in the European region to get a regulatory license and passport it across borders. So that's a huge advantage that we have, and then I think a lot of our financial institutions and fintechs are taking advantage of. And then you think about talent, being able to hire. And then most importantly, and I think this is where Visa comes in and some of the other panelists here today, can you pick the right partner to help you operate across borders, whether it's a BIN sponsor, an issuer processor, a scheme. You know, we don't pick winners or losers at Visa. We just try to enable everybody. So it's about how we help our clients scale and grow and expand our network by growing with your business. So I guess in summary, for me, it's, is there an opportunity, and can you meet that opportunity? Can you capture it? And I think in most cases today in Europe, the answer can be yes, given some of the right dynamics in the market.
I think you made some good points with some of the stats that you picked up. I mean, although there are different flavors of regions and markets, you know, COVID has kind of accelerated the death of cash and the growth of e-commerce globally. So that really represents a huge opportunity. So Adrian, I'm going to go to you. What were some of the drivers for your company to look at international expansion?
Yeah, I think that question is really a good one, because I think you also mentioned earlier around replicating success in a domestic market is actually not that easy, right? And now for us as a consultancy, I mean, we are mostly working with clients from Europe, so we're almost like remote first. But when we work together with clients, I think the driver for internationalization was in the past years quite significant, and I think this was fueled obviously also by large VC funding rounds. So I haven't seen one pitch deck, to be honest, which said we only focus on one market in Europe. There was always like the need to internationalize almost from day one. So that's one thing. Of course, the macro environment changes now a bit, and we see more and more fintechs and other well-funded companies to actually pull out of different international markets and really focus back on like the core markets. So I think there's almost like a trend that is reversing that now. But in any case, also the fintech companies I've been working on, it's a good question, because if you're successful in one market, even if it's in Europe, you cannot you shouldn't consider that success to be super easy to be copied in another market. We've seen it time and times again that we had a successful proposition, then we crossed the border and we had really to start from the beginning at zero again, like almost from a greenfield perspective, because local customer expectations, regulations, and things like that can pretty quickly become a bottleneck for internationalization. But I think the driver for internationalizing is really because VCs expected, investors expected, but also most fintech business models, they really rely on scale. So you want to get user-based growth, usage growth, volume growth, and of course it depends on the proposition. But if we're seeing increased focus on niche markets, and there you just need to scale, and you need to look at different countries across Europe to make the business model work. But I think that has been an observation from my side.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna as we get into our discussion, I'm gonna ask you a few more questions about sort of strategies and barriers. But I wanted to get everyone to have a sort of an opening view on this concept of expanding internationally. So Zoe, I'm going to go to you. What are some of the drivers that you look for?
Sure. So I guess probably helpful to introduce Capital on Tap a little bit and what we do. So we are a small business credit card. We launched in the UK in 2012 and have really been fully focused on supporting small businesses. So we've historically seen kind of underserved small businesses not having great access to financial products. So a really big opportunity there to streamline that kind of onboarding process to access a business credit card, and then a product built around the needs of a small business. So that's kind of, I think, Adrian, you kind of mentioned this point that us kind of really focusing on a particular area of the market has meant that for us, it's been a really interesting opportunity to look internationally and go into new markets to look at supporting more small businesses that we think have been underserved. So that's led for us to look into the US as a market. Obviously, a really substantial market size, millions of small businesses over here that we felt could benefit from our product. And so that was kind of really for us the driver to move over to here. And then I think, Marnie, you mentioned the couple of points there on competition. That was a piece for us, looking at kind of, is there competition? Is there space in the market? Is there an interest for a business credit card? But obviously the US definitely for us a more competitive market than what we've seen in the UK historically. But kind of that market size and that product development and kind of our ability to be innovative and developing on what small businesses are looking for has meant a really big opportunity for us over here.
Interesting. Yeah. And I'm sure that you won't miss the winters when you move to your new home in Atlanta very much. So.
I was in London. I was in London for the last 3 weeks, and I got back to Atlanta last night, and I walked into the 35-degree heat and humidity. So it's a bit of a shock to the system, but it's nice to be warm.
Interesting. So Aaron, I'll go to you. I mean, what were some of the drivers for looking to expand globally?
Well, I think we're sort of slightly different in terms of it's not so much our expansion as a business, more that we facilitate other businesses' expansion into Europe and the UK. Very similar, I guess, to Adrian and Marnie in that respect. But, but even sort of in that vein, we are strategically focused on helping companies do that equally as we are in helping companies that are starting their journey in UK and Europe, because for all the reasons that people have mentioned already today, there's massive incentive to grow your business across border in that way. I think what we do find is that some of the assumptions that might be made about Europe, for example, the assumption when you come from the US is you're going to do things either as you did before or even just in one way to manage all of your European customers. And it's not quite that straightforward. That cookie cutter approach just doesn't quite work. And I know, as you mentioned, we'll get into some of the barriers later, so I won't sort of speak to that too much right now. But yeah, it's a big push for us strategically to really try to work with those guys that have those global ambitions, that are coming into the market, and hopefully can leverage the experience that we've got to offer to make that transition a little bit smoother than it might otherwise be.
But I wanted to stay with you for a bit, because I mean, I've never met any company that that Adrian talked a little bit about, seeing clients plans, and there's no company that says we don't want to grow, we don't want to scale. Everyone wants to grow and scale. So, but that early start, that early discovery and research that you do to think, which market should we move into next, which will be an easier ride. What can you share some of those discoveries on that path?
So for me,
Aaron, yes, please.
Yeah. Well, I guess the closest comparison I can make isn't so much moving into the new market, but we had to make the same decision a lot of other FIs had to make a few years back, which was, are we going to stay in Europe with Brexit, which we won't spend too much time on, particularly what's going on at the moment in the news. But, we had a big decision to make, which was we had a business that was servicing the European continent. We did have meaningful volumes there, but ultimately there's a cost of compliance that comes with a second license. There's, you duplicate in certain positions, you're staffing up, you've got to understand how that impacts you from VAT and tax reasons and all the really fun stuff that we have to consider. But we looked at Europe and we decided it was far too fertile an opportunity to move away from. And frankly, it's interesting as well. I mentioned the differences. We're passported across all of the member states and also in the EEA. So we see businesses which are very Spanish focused versus businesses that maybe are very German focused, and they're completely different in terms of how we need to approach that. So that keeps us on our toes. But I think the opportunity in Europe is huge. If we look at the growth, I mentioned Germany in the last few years. I think that had 131% growth in fintech adoption. 2019, I think it was. So that opportunity that we've seen is also being witnessed by some of the big US and Australia and Asia Pac fintechs as well. So the opportunity to work with those and bring those into these markets is something that we're incredibly focused on.
Interesting. Yeah. So Zoe, I'll go to you. I mean, what was some of the research that Capital on Tap did that early stage to get you on that path to global expansion?
Yeah, so I think for us, we really drilled into 3 areas in particular when we were doing that research. And so number 1 was the market opportunity, looking at what the usage of small business credit cards was in that market. Were credit cards kind of the traditional credit card products that we offered, or were there any kind of local nuances like we might see in South America, for example? We'd also looking at the interchange, the kind of types of usage of the credit card for those small businesses, and kind of what that overall market opportunity looked like, a number of small businesses that were there. Number 2, we looked at data. So because we are a lender, we need to understand that business profile, the individual that's linked to that business, and understand what that risk looks like, where we're offering those credit limits. Every country has very different approaches to their underwriting availability to data. So credit bureaus, obviously in Europe, we had open banking that has kind of come about over the last few years that really kind of paved a way to be a real opportunity for us to be accessing more data where some countries don't actually have access to positive credit data. And so that was a really big kind of focus for us, that we needed to make sure we were comfortable to have the data we needed to underwrite. And then 3, for us as a lending business, we needed to understand that regulatory environment. So being able to offer, Marnie, you mentioned this at the beginning, there's lots of options for fintechs to be able to passport around Europe, but it's a little bit more challenging if you are a lender. So there are specifics based on each market that you have to dig into. And so for us, expanding into the US, you have to work with a partner bank over here. So that was a really big piece for our research, and our investigation has been finding that right partner bank that can offer the business card products that we do, and to be a really, really good, flexible and great partner to work with.
Interesting. Yeah. So Adrian, I wanted to talk with you. I mean, like, as a consultancy and working with lots of clients that are starting this journey or in the middle of this journey for expanding, what type of research should they do? What type of strategies should they look at, and what kind of common pitfalls do you see them make?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think, you always start out with data points that the company finds interesting. So he has mentioned before. So usually it's like you see these big addressable markets, and that gets everyone excited. So I think that's always like the first level of analysis. We have a good running home market. We have product market fit. So where are other similar customers across the border that we can serve with our product? I think that's always like the starting point to see. We know our target market quite well. Can we sort of duplicate that in other markets? And that's, I think, always the first like exercise that everyone is doing, that you're just doing this kind of macro research on addressable market. You see, you know your target customer segment well, and then you kind of rank them according to market size, and that gives you like a first indication and feeling for the opportunity internationally. But it gets really complex as soon as you really move along that process, because it depends a little bit on the product as well. So as Zoe mentioned, if you're serving B2B customers, then you really need to understand the local customer requirements that they have, which can be pretty significantly or can be pretty different even across Europe. So that's one thing that you need to go deeper into, talking to customers on the ground a little bit, seeing how they work, and especially, for example, for business credit cards. If you talk to business customers, every single country has like a little bit different workflows around accounts payable and receivables, and how you integrate your card products around that, how you integrate the data then into the accounting, for example, and then it gets suddenly pretty complex, but it's something that usually needs to be taken into account. So product-specific adoption metric that shows you how quickly can we actually get adoption in these specific markets, even though sometimes the target market might be very big, but it sometimes it shows that customer adoption might be quite hard to obtain with limited resources, and then that's something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And another point is, I think, also banking specific, that it depends a little bit on your operating model, if you have an own license or if you depend on partner banks. So kind of the complexity to enter in different markets. And I think we will talk about this in a second as well. But depending on the partners you have and depending on your licensing, there are different things to consider as well. So how fast you can actually launch something in that market. For example, card products are, in my experience, easier to scale in Europe compared to current accounts with local IBANs, as an example. So that's also actually really important. So complexity to enter is also something that we most often look at. And then it's more like this multidimensional matrix. So you look at how big is the addressable market, what percentage of that can I serve, given local customer requirements. Is that something that I can credibly actually launch there, or do I really need to localize the product, and how much effort would that take? And then thirdly, complexity to enter when it comes to regulation and banking partners and so on. So these are like typical things to look at it. And when it comes to pitfalls, I think it's always the local customer needs that are not well understood, and that can then suddenly really break your whole product roadmap, because suddenly you realize, hey, I need to integrate with different systems, otherwise my customers wouldn't use them. Or you find out really interesting insights that a buying decision is influenced by an external party, like an accountant, for example, and then you need to re-strategize your go-to-market and how you and your distribution. And that we've seen in some cases has been quite difficult for some fintechs, and then they pulled out of the market again because they couldn't get enough traction, or they didn't want to put in the extra mile of effort into really localizing the product enough.
Yeah.
And the second point is actually then also some things you just learn when you're on the market, and they can be too big to be solved. One specific example of that would be a fintech company that launched in Italy a B2B banking proposition, and the local, like, how to structure the KYC process and the onboarding process was in the end too complex to justify the cost and to justify the localization, and then they pulled out of Italy again. So some things you just learn on the market. I think regulatory reasons and not having a precise enough go-to-market based on local customer needs is something that we have seen a few times.
Yeah, it's really interesting that not realizing about how to localize your product, I think, gets a lot of fintechs at times. But I wanted to move in to talk a little bit more about APIs and the role APIs have in enabling companies to build card programs in other geographies, and sort of to deliver those experiences for those cardholders and customers that everyone wants to grow. So I'm going to go to Marnie for this. Go back to Visa. What role do APIs have in this journey?
Yeah. No, it's a good question, and I think like Visa is, we consider ourselves a network and a technology company at the heart. So APIs are one of our foundational building blocks to make sure that we're enabling both fintechs and financial institutions to deliver the right products and services and innovations to their customers in a really scalable way. And I think that's the beauty of APIs. And so when Visa is thinking about how we can best support international growth or address specific market challenges, we're oftentimes building together sort of a suite of APIs around a single use case or a specific market need. And we're building this suite of APIs by leveraging both some of the in-house capabilities that we have on our developer platform, but also we leverage our fintech partners through a program that we call Fintech Partner Connect. And it's a unique and global program that we have designed to help link financial institutions very quickly to a vetted and curated set of APIs and technology partners and fintechs who are providing some of these unique services. And so this means we're giving those fintech partners access to our brand, access to like our scale, access to our network of banks and merchants and partners. And then they're bringing the API, but they're also bringing that new innovation, those new ideas, and the new way of thinking to the table. So it's a really good balance and mix of sort of the traditional incumbents and the hungry new fintechs. And this has led us to have a lot of really interesting technology partnerships with a wide range of fintech companies. And maybe just one example, we're partnering with a company called Localizing, and they're trying to bridge the gap between the consumer and the bank and help the bank make the consumer more conscious and more aware of their carbon footprint. So Ecolytics, their technology and their APIs enable a bank to really engage that end customer and help those customers understand their overall impact, their carbon footprint, and then they can sort of balance and adjust their spend and compensate for where they're obviously have a bigger carbon footprint. So it's just one example of where we've built sort of a platform to leverage the power and the capabilities of APIs. And in doing so, I think we're trying to bring, again, those big institutions, but also smaller scaling fintechs to solve like specific needs or specific market challenges.
Excellent. Thank you. So yeah, Adrian, I'll go to you to maybe to get some insight on what you're seeing from some of your clients and sort of using APIs to enable this.
Yeah, I actually fully agree with Mani here. It's I think a topic that you come across all the time, regardless if it's a traditional financial institution or if it's a fintech, and that is speed. So whenever you're now developing a new product, I think that the product development times that take years are kind of over. So you always look at ways to get something really fast to market. And APIs are paramount for that. Especially since it's a huge trend that you're not building everything in-house anymore, but you're really relying more and more on external partners, especially on the technology domain. And without APIs, this would just not be possible, because it really allows to exchange not only data but also services in real time and in a scalable manner that only APIs allow. So yeah, it's really a fundamental building block of any tech provider that we work with today, and also when we are involved in RFPs for our clients. It's like all modern tech providers nowadays really build their whole services on an API first infrastructure. And I think this also shows that on the client side, the consumer of APIs, that the whole the developer domain has become so important, and because they're building the products, right? So the demand for APIs and for quick access to solutions, whether it's data, you already talked about open banking, but whether it's an issuer, it's so important that you have this API first infrastructure. Also, just to make it work on a development side and speed up the development time, and also to make the life of the developers easier. So from our perspective, it's just a really fundamental building block of fintech, and also the traditional banks. I think they have realized that it's something that helps them to also internationalize faster, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree that I think traditional banks are slowly waking up to the power of APIs. So Zoe, I'll go to you. I mean, what role have APIs played in your expansion?
Yeah, massive role. I think we couldn't have moved to the US as quickly as we did without the partners and without the API and the technology that we've built over the years. So working with Marqeta as a card processor, they enabled us to get into the market really quickly. And so that was a focus for us has always been trying to find those partners and vendors that can help us with those international expansions. So whenever we're speaking to potential new partners, it's okay, what markets are you already in? What's on your roadmap? And just making sure we're kind of aligned with that. And if there are other markets we're investigating, we want to make sure that those partners we onboard are ones that can help us with those international efforts. I think, just kind of to talk through our experience, I suppose, of launching into the US. So it was towards the end of 2020 that we kind of signed terms with our partner bank, WebBank, and really kicked things off. And so in parallel to kind of the regulatory compliance steps, that kind of onboarding with the partner bank, we kicked off the technology and the development side of things. And we had a small engineering team working with Marqeta and the other partners that we have to kind of get kicked off. And to be honest, it kept me on my toes because they were moving so quickly. It ended up being, okay, well, we need to get these compliance steps and these procedures, policies, kind of all of the marketing, the communications that our partner bank needed to see and sign off on and going back and forth, while the engineers were just kind of sprinting along in parallel. So it was I think 4 or 5 months that we were kind of running those two channels in parallel, and then we're able to launch our product, onboarding first customers in February of 2021. So that really just wouldn't have been possible without those APIs and that technology and the foundations that we built in the UK, and kind of porting those over and trying to keep them as simple and similar as possible. Really trying to kind of enable that expansion to be as seamless as possible, rather than starting things from scratch and building things in different ways. It was kind of, how do we take that foundation and kind of replicate and then just begin to kind of make bespoke to the market as we went.
And I wanted to stay with you because I wanted to hear more about that journey. We talked a little bit before in this discussion about the idea of looking at that local market and the specifics of that local market. But can you share some details about how you've designed the card products to target these different markets? Is that driven by the customers there or the regulations? What's the main driver for that localized designing of the product?
Yeah, I think there's a few different elements to consider in that. And kind of, I guess at the core of it all, we really wanted the product to be as simple and similar as possible, from kind of just avoiding a ton of technology complexity, and just kind of really keeping to our core. So that kind of initial starting point was let's keep it really similar. I think the initial kind of sort of urgent drivers for us in change was down to regulatory requirements. And so kind of in the US, there's caps on APR that have to be considered. There's communication differences that are required based on regulatory requirements, and how you communicate to customers, what information needs to be presented to them through that onboarding journey, getting additional information that might be required in the US versus the UK. We're all kind of different elements of that. And just kind of being able to adapt to the data that's available in the US. So one of our big challenges has been the differences in state by state storing of business information. So the UK, I take Companies House for granted until we moved over to the US, and then I really miss it. It definitely does make things a lot more challenging over here. So kind of those particular nuances to the market, and how do we access the data? How do we bring that information in our underwriting process through APIs into the onboarding journey? And then I guess kind of for us, it was build that core, get that live, and then has been kind of adapting to customer feedback. There's differences on payment methods over in the US compared to the UK. So direct debit in the UK, ACH debit, and auto pay in the US has meant some differences there. And so kind of just adapting the product now to what the customers are looking for, and kind of seeing what the competitors are doing in the market over in the US to make sure that we have a great product. So for us now, kind of on the roadmap, we're looking at virtual cards to enable our customers to be able to access their card details and add into their digital wallet really quickly, and then also accounting integration. So QuickBooks is really the market leader here in terms of small business accounting. So we're looking at kind of connections with Codat to try and enable that facilitation of that integration so that the data can share through. So I guess, yeah, to summarize, kind of really initial launch was driven by regulation and needing to adapt to the market requirements there. And then over time, it's been adapting to what feedback and customer engagement we've had.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think expanding into the US can be a webcast on its own some other time. But Aaron, I'm really curious to hear about your journey and like what were the main drivers to kind of design those products in a localized way. What is it the customers? Is it the regulation? What did you guys go through?
I think what's always just sort of set out resonates quite a lot with me. I think a lot of our customers come to the market, and it's obviously driven by, you know, they either believe there's a particular problem that can be solved, or they have a product that works very well somewhere else and they want to migrate that in. So we'll always start with ensuring that we've got that really thorough working understanding of that product and what it is they're trying to achieve. And then our job really is to take that and really overlay the regulations, like scheme requirements around settlement currency and so on and so forth, differences in KYC. You know, I think most of us are aware that despite there being a harmonized position in Europe, the differences from member state to member state can be quite significant in terms of how they can impact, for example, your customer journey. Let's take something as simple as validating proof of address. Now, we're licensed out of Malta, which means we have to validate the proof of address of a customer. If you're in Germany, that's not going to be something you need to do in various other member states. And although that might seem to be a fairly minor change to the product owner that's designed our onboarding journey, that's a fairly significant one. So we spend a lot of time in, you know, number one, trying to really sort of protect, I guess, the product with the appropriate regulatory structure that gives that product longevity in market. But also, and perhaps more critically, where we do have to require a change of that product, we try to make sure it's done whilst keeping in mind what the ultimate goal of that customer was. Because if we take it too far away from the ethos of what that product is and the problem it's trying to solve, it's no longer going to be fit for purpose. And yeah, I think that's it's a role that's almost consultative at start before you get into the market. I think it comes back to understanding those local nuances and also culturally as well, what people in that market are from a end customer perspective are actually willing to do. But no, in terms of what drives it most, on our side, we would say regulation and scheme compliance. But in reality, you can't isolate that from ultimately what the client is trying to deliver.
Yeah, Adrian, I wanted to go to you. I mean, is that what you're saying? It's kind of like regulations are the top driver, but then it's really at the end of the day that the customer that designs that local product for, in a way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct what Aaron and Zoe have mentioned here. So that's what we see time and times again. And also maybe one point that has not been mentioned yet is that we often also help like fintech companies to understand local the local competitive field. And we recently, for example, helped a fintech to expand into Eastern Europe. And of course, you have to look at regulation. And I also have to say, if you have the right partners, they actually often abstract a lot of complexity away for you as the user. So many, partners in the banking provider space try to make it actually quite easy for their customers to expand into new markets. But regardless of the regulation, I mean, that's just what you have to do. And spend some time on the ground with customers to get really a contextual customer understanding, like what Zoe mentioned, that in the US, if you don't have a QuickBooks integration, like you can't, it would not make sense to launch there, right? So these things are like really important, but at the same time, what I now mentioned around Eastern Europe, for example, we were quite surprised that incumbent banks have been quite digitalized already, and many features have been already on a fintech, on par with some really innovative fintechs. Where if you don't have that local market knowledge, then you're really launching and you think you're innovative, whereas a lot of incumbent banks already offer these features since years. So I think competition is also important whenever you launch in a new market, where we saw that we had to tweak the product a little bit just to be able to stand out, and whether that was the pricing or the way you monetize the product, or how that you offer at least a feature set that was comparable to the competition, and of course in the best case even better. That's also something that we've been experiencing quite often, that you also have to have a look obviously at new competitors that you have to compete against in new markets.
Interesting. So I wanted to go back to Marnie. I mean, there aren't many places in the world that don't accept Visa. So we can kind of say that you're live on most of the planet. I mean, are there any sort of key learnings of specific regions or things that pop out in your mind that could be good to point out to companies that are thinking of expanding to various places around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So my client set obviously is fintechs, and I don't even want to be in their shoes when they're sort of trying to decide when and how and where to scale their business. But like you said, I think Visa has the luxury of already having the scale and like the reach of its network, and so our role, as I think I've mentioned before, is just how do we enable others to drive their own scale and growth. And for me, when we're sort of partnering with our clients and thinking about where they should go next and helping in whatever capacity we can, I think our advice is often, where do you as the fintech want to do things on your own, and where should your focus lie? And then where do you want to outsource or partner? So, and from my experience, what you build in-house as a fintech is, I think many people have mentioned, it's the product. It's focusing on the product market fit and who the customers are and how differentiated your product is, how defined your use cases, making sure that you're meeting basic customer expectations, making sure that you're building your brand and getting eyeballs on the business. Like that's kind of all those are the fun sort of sexy things that our clients want to focus on, and that's where their expertise is needed. Where it makes sense to partner is maybe on some of the more high risk, maybe more tedious types of challenges that you are faced with when you're entering a new market. And some of those, I mean, I think we've mentioned here before, like sometimes a partner can help in some of the decisions that the fintech's actually making by helping explain local nuances or customer behaviors in that certain region, because it is not necessarily the same to go from being successful in France to transporting it over to Germany. It's just a totally different environment and totally different dynamics. So that's one element that I think a partner can bring. But then on the like high risk or challenging pieces, we've talked about compliance has been a problem, regulatory approvals, network licensing. Getting a Visa license isn't always the easiest thing to do. And so that's where, we help hopefully streamline it, setting up bank accounts, figuring out how to settle and move money around the region, making sure you're choosing the right processing partner and bin sponsor. Like all of those questions and all of those challenges are where I think the power it lies with somebody else, and the leveraging partners early on in that process helps you focus on what you can control and what you can decide on, and we can take care of the rest. And that's the goal.
Interesting. So I wanted to go back to Zoe. I know you've talked a lot about, obviously opening up and expanding into the US, but where are all the places that Capital on Tap is live now? And what were some of the learnings from it?
So we are live in the UK and the US.
Okay.
And I think my kind of two key learnings that I was going to touch on. One is very similar to what Marnie was mentioning, and being in the shoes of the fintech, trying to navigate all of those different priorities and kind of what order of events do you go down to launch in a new market. Leveraging those partners was so important for us. So we have a great relationship with Visa, we have a great relationship with Marqeta, and just being able to kind of connect with both of those and kind of just brainstorming, just talking, just having experts to kind of discuss certain problems and kind of what solutions are available. And similarly with our kind of payment processing side, so we work with Checkout and Go Cardless, who kind of support our payment processing in the UK, and then luckily it also gone over to the US, which really helped us to kind of be able to launch really seamlessly over there. So I think, that partner relationships is really, really crucial. And then for us, finding that partner bank in the US that was able to support us with our specific product. So obviously kind of business credit cards is a bit more niche than kind of more general credit cards or loans. And so just kind of really finding that partner that was kind of going to go along for the ride and kind of work really closely with us to launch successfully was super important, and a really kind of key learning for me that I hadn't been aware of before, and I think is a really important takeaway. And then the other key learning that I would touch on would be hiring and finding great talent. And so for us, when we launched into the US, the one gap that we knew we had was US compliance, US regulations. And so the first hire that we brought in is our head of US compliance. And she and I worked super closely together to get things kicked off, and couldn't have done it without her, and really needed that expertise and really, really deep knowledge to kind of know what path, what priorities, what important things we needed to work on. And so from there, bringing in our first employee and then building out the team in the US, it's tough attracting talent, especially the market was very competitive the last couple of years. So finding really great people has been a challenge, but we've really built out that core team now, and I think just finding the right culture fit, the right people to kind of come and help you launch in that new market is really important. Finding those local experts and those kind of and that those people that fit in with your fintech, your company is really important. And so that kind of just helps speed you along once you've got those right people on the team.
Yep. No company expands in isolation. It takes an ecosystem, obviously. So, Aaron, I wanted to go to you. I mean, what has been your company's experience? I mean, where are you live now, and what were some of the learnings you can share?
So we're live in both the UK and across Europe with issuance in pretty much every country now, and program managers dotted throughout. I actually think that when we sort of were licensed for the first time in Europe directly, though, it was a learning experience for us. I think the major lesson that I took away, and it might sound a little bit obvious, was don't make assumptions that the perspective is the same there as what you've always experienced. And we spend an awful lot of time sitting down with local regulators, for example, and central bank and the MFSA, and really taking them through the business model and trying to explain to them how BIN sponsorship worked and our role within the sort of the wider payments ecosystem. And I think that was made a lot easier by, firstly, again, finding the right local advisory to take us through it, people who could or were well versed in speaking the same language in terms of terminology, and we're able to clearly articulate our model in a way that sometimes you can't yourself, because you're just assuming that people are on that same page as you. And the second was building a local team. We've been incredibly lucky to defined. Malta's a small country. Our other jurisdiction is Gibraltar, which is even smaller. So attracting talent is always a challenge. But we've been incredibly, I'd say, incredibly fortunate in some of the individuals that we've managed to recruit in key positions. And I think that is, coupled with our local advice, has made the process a lot smoother than it could otherwise have been. Not just to get the license, but to have sort of migrated what is now 70% of our business over to a new jurisdiction.
I wanted to stay with you for a bit because I wanted to know, were there any surprises that just appeared during this process that you hadn't forecasted or planned for that you can share with us?
Yeah, I guess the main one was really how much we had to take a step back and really start from really stage one in terms of explaining the business and what we were going to be doing there. But it was an incredibly useful exercise because it does cause you to re-evaluate certain aspects of your business, why you do things in that way, and gaining an understanding of whether that still makes sense in the new world. And I think that's been useful when helping our customers now sort of set up in new countries and understand that they too have to come at that challenge in the same way, very open, very understanding. That there's absolutely, I think one of the biggest dangers is not actually clearly articulating what your plan is and what you intend to do, because for your partners who are going to work with you, for the regulator that's going to oversee you, for the bank that's going to bank you, all that's really what they need to know in order to assess whether they actually want to do business with you.
So I'll pass that same question on to Zoe now. I mean, were there any surprises in this journey that you just the company just hadn't forecasted or planned for that you can share?
I think it's a tricky one. I guess when kind of you get to the point where you decide on that new market, you've gone through all that research, you've kind of looked at, you think you have a really good understanding of what you need to do. There's always those kind of curveballs that get thrown at you. I suppose kind of one of the challenging pieces for us was we had a great selection of partners that we worked with, but we often do this. We end up working with kind of new fintechs who are quite new in the space, and we end up kind of really working together to help each other build their products. So I think we were the first partner to launch from the UK to the US with Marqeta, and so we were one of their first clients in Europe, and then kind of going back to into the US, which in itself just you're pushing partners to do new things, right? Like they haven't got their playbook, and they haven't got kind of a really structured approach to some of those if you're working with more new startup techie fintech partners. So that was kind of probably one of the surprises of kind of actually having to really kind of get into the nitty gritty and really kind of understand that project plan and how you were going to kind of bring together on a call Visa, Marqeta, Webbank, right? Everybody, how are we going to do this and getting that through. So I think that was probably one of the biggest surprises that I had.
So I'll go to Adrian now. I mean, with the clients that you work with, what are some of the surprises that they see often that you've noticed?
Yeah, I think I would even say if you don't if you're not surprised every other week if you launch a new market, then you're almost like doing something wrong. At least like not talking obviously about the regulatory stuff, but at least on the product side, you should have many surprises. And I think that's just the nature of how it works. If you want to find also product market fit in abroad, there are always surprises, and I think the key here is really the customer context that you can only get if you're really on the ground. And sometimes you of course do customer testing beforehand, but along the way you will always learn some new things. One example is maybe a Nordic B2B proposition that we launched in German-speaking markets. And as everyone knows, the Nordics are super digitalized, German-speaking markets not so much. And I think there we try to push hard a super digital solution and we found early adopters. But if you want to scale that solution to like the larger majority of your target group, we realized that we need to take a step back and just make it work for the user if they're not ready for it yet. So sometimes you can be almost like too ahead of the market even. And there then we had to build different adjacent services around the product to make it useful for our users. And that's something that we learned almost like the hard way. We really tried it for too long, and we couldn't find the right product market fit until we just localized the product a little bit more. And I think one other interesting learning for the same client was around IBANs. Obviously, that's not so much connected to cards. I think cards are, as I said at the beginning, kind of a little bit easier to scale. But as soon as you integrate other banking products, you really need to think also about localization, like local IBANs and so on, because sometimes, especially across Europe, if you're scaling, and especially B2B products, many providers are just conservative and old school, and if potentially you can use an EU IBAN across markets, but it's not the case in the real life of a user, and that's also something that we learned, and years later then basically founded a local subsidiary to get a local IBAN, for example. So these are things that you just need to take into account, and but these have been positive surprises because they kind of guide you along the way to product market fit abroad, and I think that's super important. And also to the topic of localized teams, that's obviously something that tremendously helps you to speed up that learning process because they know the local market quite well.
Wonderful. So we've got about a little less than 10 minutes left. I know we've had some of our audience members having comments and waving to each other, which is always fun to have to meet people in this electric age. But we're going to ask a final question of everyone, and this is kind of your views and opinions about expansions in fintechs. There have been some high-profile successes of fintechs expanding globally, and also some pretty high-profile companies that have pulled out of countries like the US or from Europe, pulling out of the UK for a whole host of reasons, regulation, product market fit, Brexit, to name just a few. So I would love to hear your views on this sort of industry-wide, the successes and failures. I guess no one wants to really point out or name any companies specifically, but I'd love to hear some of your views. So I'm going to go to Zoe first about what's your opinion about this current state of global expansion and where it's going.
Yeah, I think to touch on, I think from our conversation today, we've all alluded to the challenges of going international. It's not easy, and so I think that's obviously a big part of that. There's always going to be successes and failures where it is a really challenging process to launch in a new market. There's so many different variables to consider, but I think kind of overall, just the opportunity that technology, the networks, the regulators have actually allowed that international expansion and help facilitate that international expansion is just a great thing for different markets. Having different companies from different countries coming in with a new perspective, pushing innovation, pushing new boundaries, I think it's only a positive thing. And kind of I'm hopeful that kind of the different fintech partners that we've discussed today can really help facilitate that growth and push that even further so that we can all keep growing into new industries and new markets.
Interesting. So Aaron, I'll go to you. What are some of your views about some of the successes and failures the industry's had over the past few years?
Yeah, it's difficult to add too much to what Zoe said. Other than, I think we've seen some very particular examples. Buy Now Pay Later coming over to the UK has done very, very well. Is one example that I'd point to. Despite currently certain sort of businesses struggling a little bit, they get given the change in market conditions. But no, I think that it's not a trend I see reversing in any way, shape, or form. I think, but it feels, despite the challenges, as the natural way to grow your business, to offer your product to more people in more territories, is always going to be an attractive proposition to those who've got the idea and the funding to execute against it. So, despite the challenges, I don't see any shift. I just feel that companies now are getting better at identifying when a market isn't working for them, and I don't see it as a failure to withdraw from the market. I see it as the right decision. It's brave, in fact, to be able to take away from the market if it isn't quite working for you and focusing your efforts on those markets where you've got a greater chance of success. For me, that's just the right call, and sometimes you won't know that for all the reasons we've discussed today until you've actually dipped your toe in that market. So.
No, I agree. I think fintechs are all about the quick no, not the slow, painful death. So yeah, so it's interesting. So Marnie, I'd love to hear your views about the successes and failures we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think we work with over 100 different fintechs in the European region alone, and there's obviously a lot of new entrants to the market, but even our existing clients, they're constantly trying to figure out how they launch in the next region, and Capital on Tap's one great example. I think where we've like one sort of segment, so Aaron mentioned BNPL, another segment that we've seen a lot of success in terms of going international is crypto. So despite sort of the macro trends in crypto right now, I think that segment of clients has always been global. They're sort of, by definition, they're borderless. So you have to, if you're going to launch with a crypto client, you have to be ready to go international. And I think what we've done well and what they've also done well on the client side is one, just kind of understanding and being an expert in the space and sort of, again, knowing their place in the competitive landscape, and doing the research and understanding the use case and the product and the customer fit. And then they've done a good job about focusing on partnering with the right BIN sponsors or the issuer processors or the Visas of the world. And they don't try to do everything. They work with us to launch quickly and efficiently. And then I think the third thing that they've done well is like they've all had global ambitions, but they haven't necessarily launched everywhere all at the same time. So you have to think about where and how to stagger that rollout and which markets to prioritize or which customer bases to prioritize, and then sort of phase everything else in over time. And that's worked really well. I think where there's been failures, and again, not to name names, but we've kind of all talked about like not having a differentiated product, not having a clear use case or the right product market fit, and not understanding the market dynamics, and also maybe not appreciating the challenges of working across borders, across different time zones with different people. Like I think culturally there's always challenges when you're launching somewhere else, particularly if it's like a US to Europe or something like that. So there's certain trends or themes that you can probably pick up on that are common throughout some of the more well-known failures that we've seen. So ones to be avoided. But I agree with everybody else. Like I think it's not going anywhere. We're going to continuously see fintechs trying to launch and scale internationally, and that's the exciting challenge that we have.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I've never met a company once that said we don't want to expand or grow. It's just not in the nature. So Adrian,
Exactly.
we have 3 more minutes. I'd love to get your final thoughts on the successes and failures we've seen over the past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with everyone here. So internationalization is always it's kind of important, of course, that you can show a growth path of your company, and it's always exciting to work on these expansion challenges. But at the same time, I think really given that the macro environment is changing now, and valuations get slashed, funding rounds become a little bit smaller, and also VCs are a bit more selective in the business models that they fund. I definitely see that there is now, as Mani said, a little bit more due diligence done and more, I think, seriousness and prioritization in which markets and which segments you really want to serve, instead of just going really quickly internationally. And because the money was there, so you could do it, of course, but now it's a little bit more disciplined, I would say. And that's also good, I think, because then you can avoid these situations where you just launch in many markets and then realize that it's difficult to get product market fit everywhere. And also given that it's a regulated product that we're talking here, so more obviously that always requires more effort than, let's say, a simple direct-to-consumer app, which doesn't need to take that many different laws and policies into account. So yeah, but in general, I agree with the sentiment. It's we will see definitely continued expansion, but maybe just a little bit more selected.
Excellent. Wonderful. This has been a really interesting discussion, and with the hour just kind of flew by, but I really want to thank Zoe, Aaron, Marnie, and Adrian for wonderful insights. I hope this was very helpful for all of the fintech companies that are watching here. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.